The alien walked into our council chamber like it owned the floor beneath its feet, and every human in that room felt it. Not fear, something older than fear. The deep, animal awareness that something in the room does not see you as an equal. I was standing in the upper gallery when it happened. My name is Calvin Hart, and I had spent 19 years in Earth's Unified Defense Corps, watching humanity climb back from its lowest point. Wars, famine, the resource collapse of 2089, the slow rebuilding that followed. I had seen us bleed. I had seen us refuse to stay down. So when this creature, tall and pale-scaled with eyes like polished bronze coins, walked to the center of the solar assembly floor and looked at our elected council the way a man looks at an anthill before stepping on it, something shifted behind my ribs. Not fear, anger, clean and cold and patient. The creature's name was Vreth Sa-Kalan, which our translators rendered roughly as third voice of the Dominion. Its species, the Vreth, had been a name in classified intelligence files for about 6 years. We had intercepted fragments of their communication signals near the outer belt. We had found the remains of 2 probes they had sent into our system, quiet little machines that drifted past our settlements and scanned everything before going dark. We had known they were watching. We had not known how little they thought of what they saw. Third voice stood at the center of the chamber floor and spoke in its own language. The translator feed came through the earpieces worn by every council member, clean and precise, because we had been preparing for this moment. The message was short, shorter than anyone expected. Humanity was to cease all expansion beyond the Kepler belt within 30 days. All colonial vessels operating past that boundary were to turn back immediately. Any further expansion would be treated as a hostile act against the Vreth Dominion, and would be met with what Third Voice called, without any emotion at all, corrective action. That was the whole message. No greeting. No acknowledgement of our civilization, our history, our losses, or our hard-won progress. No recognition that we were a species with names and families and 100,000 years of survival written into our bones. Just a deadline and a threat, delivered the way you leave a note on a car you want moved from your parking spot. Council Speaker Lena Marsh leaned forward. She was 61 years old, had rebuilt 2 collapsed governments before taking her seat at the assembly, and her face was completely unreadable. She asked, through the translator, whether the Vreth Dominion was aware that the settlements beyond the Kepler belt had been established over the course of 40 years and housed more than 3 million human beings. Third Voice answered without hesitation. It said the Dominion was aware. It said the presence of biological units did not change the terms. It said we had 30 days. Then it turned and walked out. The chamber was completely silent for 6 full seconds. I counted. 6 seconds of 212 of Earth's most senior officials sitting perfectly still, processing what had just happened. Then Speaker Marsh looked up at the gallery where I was standing and caught my eye. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I had been attached to her security detail for 4 years, and I knew that look. It was the same one she wore in private briefings when something had already been decided, and the public discussion was just a formality. The vote to officially ignore the Dominion's ultimatum passed by a margin of 194 to 18. No reply was sent. I walked out of the gallery afterward, alongside Lieutenant Petra Collins, who had been stationed next to me for the last 2 hours, and had not said a word the entire time. Petra was 28, ran calculations faster than most people breathed, and had a habit of chewing on the inside of her cheek when she was working through something. She was doing it now. "You think they will actually follow through?" she asked. I did not answer right away. We walked down the long corridor that connected the gallery exit to the main concourse, past the wide windows that looked out over the city, the towers catching the late afternoon light, the streets below moving with ordinary life. People who had no idea that something had just been set in motion above their heads. "Yes," I said. "And us?" I thought about Kepler Station, about the 3 million people in the settlements the Dominion had just described as biological units with a deadline. I thought about 19 years of service and every single thing I had watched humanity survive. "Yes," I said again. "And us." She nodded slowly, still chewing the inside of her cheek, and then she looked out the window and was quiet for the rest of the walk. We passed a group of school children in the concourse below, maybe 10 years old, laughing at something one of them had said, completely unaware, completely alive, completely ours. I stopped walking. I stood there and watched them for a moment. Then I took out my comm unit and sent a single coded message to the Defense Corps command channel. The reply came back in 40 seconds. It confirmed what I already suspected. The rapid response fleet that had been quietly assembled over the last 6 years, the one that existed in no public record, The one built in the shadow of intelligence reports about Vreth probe activity near our borders had already been positioned. It had been ready and waiting for 9 months. The Dominion gave us 30 days. We had already been preparing for 30 months. I put my comm unit away and walked out into the afternoon. The city moved around me, ordinary and alive and completely itself, and somewhere far above our ships sat quiet in the dark, patient as held breath. When Third Voice's transport broke atmosphere and climbed toward the stars, our long-range tracking systems followed it, all the way to the edge of sensor range. We recorded its heading. We cataloged its drive signature. We filed it under a case number that had been open for 6 years and added a single line of new information. The subject is now aware the message was received. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen's table for a long time. My daughter Nora, 14 years old and sharp as a blade, came and sat across from me without being asked. She looked at my face and did not ask what was wrong. She just put a glass of water in front of me and sat there. And the quiet between us was the kind that only exists between people who trust each other completely. "Something happened today," she said eventually. "Not a question?" "Yes," I said. "Is it bad?" I thought about it carefully, because Nora deserved careful answers. "It is serious," I said, "but we are ready." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. The same measured nod I had seen her mother use 1,000 times before she passed, and she got up and went to bed. No panic, no dramatics. Just a quiet, steady acceptance that was more human than anything I had seen in that council chamber all day. I sat at the table a while longer. Then I pulled out a notepad and started writing down everything I remembered about the way Third Voice had stood in that chamber. The angle of its shoulders, the direction of its eyes when it looked at the council, the complete absence of any concern in its posture. It had not looked at us the way you look at something dangerous. That was its mistake. I wrote it all down. Then I folded the paper, put it in my jacket pocket, and went to bed. 30 days later, when the Dominion came, we were ready. But that night, sitting in my kitchen with the city quiet outside my window and the stars hidden behind cloud cover, I let myself feel the weight of what was coming. Not with dread, not with excitement, with the steady, serious attention of someone who has been given an important task and intends to do it properly. 3 million people lived past the Kepler belt. They had built homes and schools and lives out there in the dark. Nobody was moving them. Nobody was going to take what we had built. Whatever was coming, we would meet it on our feet, eyes open, with every advantage we had spent years quietly assembling. The Dominion had looked at us and seen something small, something manageable, something that would receive an ultimatum, calculate the odds, and step aside. They had looked at humanity and seen something that could be frightened. I closed my eyes. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The first thing that happened on the 31st day was not an explosion. It was silence. The long-range listening post at Kepler Station's outer ring went quiet at 0412 station time. Not static, not interference, just nothing. The kind of nothing that means something very large has moved between you and the signal source and absorbed everything. I was already awake. I had been awake for 2 hours, sitting in the tactical operations room aboard the UDS Callaway, a heavy destroyer that had been sitting dark and cold in a debris field 40,000 kilometers from Kepler Station's primary docking ring for the last 18 days. Dark and cold meant no active emissions, no engine heat, no communications. We were, to any sensor sweep, a piece of rock. There were 41 other ships in that debris field with us. Lieutenant Petra Collins was at the sensor station to my left, and when the signal dropped, she looked up at me immediately. I was already looking at her. "Count," I said. 17 drive signatures, she said, reading from the passive sensor feed, which was still running, quiet and invisible. "No, 20, they are still translating in. Wait." A pause. 24 confirmed. 2 more resolving. 26 Vreth warships. That was twice the size of what our intelligence assessments had projected for a demonstration strike. Either they had decided to be thorough, or they had been more insulted by our silence than we expected. I thought about Third Voice standing in the assembly chamber, the complete certainty in its posture, the total absence of any concern. I decided it was thoroughness. They wanted to make a point so clear that no further communication would be necessary. They were going to hit Kepler Station, and they expected us to understand the message. "Status on the colony sectors?" I asked. Petra's expression did not change, but her jaw tightened slightly. "The civilian transport window closed 12 hours ago. All non-essential personnel are out. Beat 1,400 remain. Station crew and defense volunteers. They would not leave." 1,400 people who had decided that their home was worth standing next to. I filed that away in the part of my mind that kept track of things worth remembering. On the tactical display, the 26 Vreth ships were moving into a standard Dominion assault formation. We had studied their tactics extensively, taken apart every engagement record we had been able to gather from the other civilizations they had rolled over in the past century. The Dominion was effective. They were powerful. They had more experience in open space combat than any other force we knew of. They had never fought humans. All ships. This is hard, I said into the command channel, keeping my voice level and quiet. Execute on my mark, targets as assigned. Sequence green. 26 acknowledgement signals came back, one from each of the ships around me, each one a single soft pulse that meant ready. On the display, the Vreth formation was tightening. They were preparing to fire on Kepler Station. I watched the timer count down. 3 seconds before their lead ship reached optimal firing position, I said, "Mark." 42 ships came out of that debris field, like something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. What happened next lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes, but the first 40 seconds decided everything. Our positioning had been calculated down to the meter. Every Vreth ship had 2 of ours assigned to it before the engagement began, one to draw its attention and one to hit it from an angle it was not expecting. The Dominion's formation, perfect for a strike against a stationary target, was exactly wrong for an engagement from multiple directions at once. They adapted, I will give them that. They were trained. They were experienced. And the moment they realized what was happening, their commanders began issuing rapid orders and their ships started moving. 2 of our vessels took serious damage in the first 10 minutes. One, the UDS Pharaoh, took a hit to its engine section and went into an uncontrolled drift that her crew corrected over the next 22 minutes with what I can only describe as extraordinary seamanship. But they were already inside our net before they knew the net existed, and by the time their fleet admiral understood the full picture, we had reduced his options to 1. I will not describe the rest of it in detail. People made decisions under pressure and paid prices for them, on both sides, and those moments belonged to the people who lived through them. What I will say is that 4 hours and 17 minutes after the first shot, the last functional Vreth ship in that engagement transmitted a distress signal, and then went dark. We recovered 41 Vreth crew members from the debris. We took them aboard, got them medical care, and put them in secured quarters that were, by any standard, considerably better than anything I had seen in Vreth ship designs when we examined their vessels. I want to be clear about that because it matters. How you treat the people you have beaten says more about you than the beating itself. Petra brought me a full damage assessment 2 hours after the engagement ended. We had lost 11 crew members across the fleet. The UDS Pharaoh had a hole in her engine section big enough to walk through, and 4 other ships had damage that would take weeks to repair. I read the list of the 11 names. I read it slowly all the way through. Then I set it down. After a while, I picked up the communications console and composed a message, not to Earth, not to the Assembly. The message addressed to the Vreth Dominion High Command, routed through the emergency frequency their own ships had been using. The message contained the coordinates of the engagement area, a summary of the outcome in plain numbers, and 4 sentences. But the people at Kepler Station are still there. The settlements beyond the Kepler belt are still there. The people in them are still there. Your move. I sent it and set the console down and looked out through the forward viewport at the debris field that had, 18 days ago, been indistinguishable from the one we were hiding in now. Petra came and stood next to me. She looked at the same view for a moment. They are going to be angry, she said. Yes, I said. They are going to send more. Yes, she was quiet for a moment, then good. I looked at her. Because now we know we can do this, she said simply. And now they know they cannot ignore us. Outside, the debris turned slowly in the starlight, and somewhere in the distance, past the belt, past the cold and the dark, and everything the Dominion had decided humanity was not worth considering. 3 million people were going about their lives in homes they had built and were going to keep. The message was sent, the point was made, but neither of us was under any illusion about what came next. We went back to work. For the next 6 weeks, Earth's government said very little publicly. There were no declarations, no speeches, no triumphant press releases. Speaker Marsh gave a single brief address to the Assembly, in which she stated that the Dominion's action had been met, and that humanity's position had not changed. She did not use dramatic language. She spoke as if she were summarizing a budget review. That restraint was deliberate, and I respected it deeply. Behind the quiet, we were anything but still. Every shipyard in the inner system that had been operating at half capacity for the past 2 years was now running at full. Every reserve officer who had been on administrative leave was recalled. The research teams working on Vreth technology from the recovered ships were running around the clock. I spent those 6 weeks in transit, moving between fleet positions, attending briefings, reviewing training reports, checking and rechecking the disposition of our forces. I slept about 4 hours a night and ate most of my meals while reading documents. On the 42nd day after the Kepler engagement, our signals intelligence team intercepted a Vreth High Command transmission. The encryption was good but not good enough, and our analysis team had it decoded within the hour. The transmission authorized the mobilization of the Dominion's 4th and 7th Assault Groups, a combined force of over 230 warships, to be assembled at a staging point 12 light-years from Earth's system and launched within 60 days. 230 ships. Against the 42 we had used at Kepler, that was more than 5 to 1. I read the intercept 3 times. Then I put it in my pocket and went to find Commander Owen Greer, who ran our strategic planning division and had been, in a previous life, a professor of military history at the University of Edinburgh. Owen was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanent expression of someone doing difficult arithmetic in their head. He read the intercept without reaction, folded it neatly, handed it back to me and said, "Well, it is about what we expected. Your recommendation," I said. He took off his glasses and polished them thoughtfully. "We cannot match them in a straight fight. Not at those numbers, not yet. What we can do is make every ship they send us cost them more than they budgeted. Attrition, deception, speed." He put his glasses back on. "We make this war expensive. Expensive enough that the rest of their empire starts asking whether we are worth the price." I thought about that. And if they decide we are? Owen considered the question with the same calm he brought to everything. "Then we make the price higher," he said. Outside the window of the planning room, the stars were very still. Somewhere among them, a force 5 times larger than anything we had yet faced was being assembled and pointed at us. I thought about Nora at the kitchen table, her steady eyes, her quiet nod. I thought about 1,400 people who had refused to leave their home. I thought about Third Voice standing in the assembly chamber, looking at us like we were nothing. "Get me the full logistics breakdown on the staging point," I said, "and get me Captain Nina Ford from the strike wing. I want a conversation about what it would take to make that staging point considerably less useful before those 230 ships are ready to leave of it." Owen almost smiled. "Almost. I will have them both here within the hour," he said, and the work continued. Nobody who has not lived through a real war understands what the middle of one feels like. It does not feel like the beginning, which has a terrible clarity to it, a sharpness the way cold water sharpens your senses. The middle of a war feels like weight. Not the dramatic, crushing weight of a single moment, but the slow, accumulating weight of days and weeks and decisions, of reports and numbers and names, of the knowledge that every choice you make is load-bearing, and the building is very tall. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what the next 4 months actually were before I tell you what happened in them. They were not a series of exciting events. They were work. Hard, relentless, exhausting work performed by thousands of people who had chosen to stand between their world and something that wanted to end it. The Vreth 4th and 7th Assault Groups arrived at the edge of our system 63 days after the intercept, just slightly behind the timeline we had projected. They were larger than anticipated. 241 ships by final count, organized into 3 combat groups with dedicated support and logistics chains, commanded by a Vreth Grand Admiral named, our translator informed us, something that meant roughly unbroken current. I decided to call him Current in my own notes. It felt accurate. He moved like water finding its way downhill, constantly, patiently, searching for the path of least resistance. We gave him very little resistance to find. That was intentional. Owen Greer's strategy was not built around stopping the advance. It was built around shaping it. Every time Current's fleet pressed forward, we pulled back just enough to deny him a clean engagement, just enough to make him move further from his supply lines, just enough to draw him into space that we knew and he did not. We gave ground strategically and we made him pay for every kilometer. Not in ships, not yet, but in time and fuel and uncertainty, because uncertainty is expensive. Every hour that Current's fleet admiral did not know exactly where our forces were, he had to consider every possibility. He had to account for things that might not even exist. He had to be careful, and careful is slow. I commanded the Anvil fleet from the Callaway, moving constantly, never staying in the same position for more than 36 hours. We were the reserve, the hidden weight at the back of the board, and my orders were clear and simple and among the hardest I had ever been given. Do not engage, stay invisible, wait. Waiting while people fight is one of the most difficult things a military commander can do. I know this from experience, and I knew it acutely during those weeks. There were days when the tactical feeds showed our forward units taking fire, and I had the resources to help them, and I did nothing because doing nothing was exactly right and exactly necessary, and it cost something every single time. Petra ran our sensor and intelligence operation from the station next to mine. She worked with a focused intensity that I found steadying, the same way a well-calibrated instrument is steadying. She did not waste energy on things she could not affect, and she directed everything she had at the things she could. On day 31 of the Vreth advance, she came to me with something new. She had been working with a team of 3 physicists who had been analyzing the Vreth drive signatures captured during every engagement since Kepler, building a dataset that now contained records from more than 400 individual ships. What they had found was a pattern in the quantum distortion that preceded a Vreth FTL jump, a specific harmonic that occurred consistently between 85 and 95 seconds before the jump completed. In practical terms, this meant we could know where a Vreth ship was going to appear 90 seconds before it arrived. I stared at the report for a long time. "How confident are you?" I asked. 91% at the moment, Petra said. "With 2 more weeks of data, the team believes we can get that above 96. 90 seconds of warning. In space combat, 90 seconds is an enormous amount of time. It is the difference between a ship being where the enemy expects and being exactly where it will do the most damage. It is the difference between reacting and being ready." 2 more weeks, I said. Yes. I thought about what we had been asked to hold through those 2 weeks. I thought about the forward units absorbing pressure they were not designed to absorb indefinitely. I thought about the weight I had described at the start of all this, the accumulation of it. Then I thought about what we could do with a 96% accurate prediction of every enemy FTL jump. 2 weeks, I said. Then bring me the final numbers. Those 2 weeks were among the most difficult of the entire conflict. Current's advance was applying real pressure now. Our forward units were stretched, and the public back home was beginning to ask questions that the government was answering carefully, but not, by any honest measure, completely. People knew we were at war. They did not know how deep in it we were. Nora called me on the 14th day. She had grown 2 centimeters since I had last seen her in person, which struck me as remarkable, and also, in the way that only the small details of the people you love can manage, almost unbearable in how ordinary it was. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired," I said. "Are we winning?" I thought about Owen's strategy, about Petra's signature data, about the 41 ships waiting invisibly at my back, about 1,400 people who had not left their home. "We are setting up to win," I said. "It takes longer." She nodded the measured nod. "Okay," she said. "I will let you go, Nora." "Yes, how is school?" She paused as if the question was slightly surprising. Then she smiled, and it was her mother's smile, complete and certain. "It is good," she said. "My history teacher says humanity has a habit of coming through things it has no right to come through." "Your history teacher is correct," I said. We said goodbye. I sat with the blank screen for a moment after she disconnected. Then I pulled up the tactical overview and got back to work. On the 16th day, Petra brought me the final numbers. 97.3% accuracy on the FTL prediction system. We could detect the harmonic signature on any Vreth drive in our sensor range and have precise jump coordinates before the ship arrived. I sent Owen Greer a 1-line message. "It is time," he replied within 2 minutes. "I know. I have been ready." I convened the command group aboard the Callaway that evening. 7 officers, the commanders of each of the Anvil Fleet's major elements, gathered around the tactical table in the main briefing room. I stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them for a moment before speaking. They were tired. They all were. This was not the shining, clean version of military service that sometimes appears in stories. These were people who had been running on reduced sleep and high tension for months, who had been making hard choices and living with them, who had given themselves completely to something larger than any one of them. I was proud of every single one of them. I did not say it then because the moment did not call for it, but I am saying it now. "Tomorrow we stop retreating," I said. "Tomorrow we hit them from behind, below and above simultaneously, at 7 of their staging systems, with everything we have been holding in reserve." I looked at the tactical display. They will not see it coming because they have never seen it coming from something they had not identified yet. We are going to come out of the dark, and we are going to hit hard, and we are going to keep hitting until the advance collapses. Commander Alan Briggs, who ran our heaviest capital ship element, leaned forward. "What about Current's main fleet?" "Current's main fleet," I said, is going to have 41 things to pay attention to that are not him. By the time he can organize a response, the staging systems will be gone and he will be deep in our space with no support structure and no clean path home. Nobody at that table smiled. This was not a smiling moment, but I saw something move through the room. A collective steadying, a shift in posture. The way people look when the waiting is over, and the thing they have been preparing for is finally here. Questions? I said. There were none. Get some sleep, I said, all of you. 4 hours minimum. Tomorrow we go to work, they filed out. Petra stayed. She looked at the tactical display for a moment. What happens if it does not work exactly as planned, she asked. This was not doubt. It was Petra doing what she always did, accounting for every variable. Then we adapt, I said. The way we always do, she nodded slowly. Right. She picked up her coffee, which had been cold for an hour, and drank it anyway. I will have the jump coordinates finalized in 3 hours. Good. She left. I stood alone at the tactical table, looking at the display, at the small bright markers that represented the Vreth advance and the quieter, less visible markers that represented everything we had been quietly building and positioning and waiting with. The Dominion had given us 30 days. We had spent 2 years preparing for this. Tomorrow the patience was going to run out. The 7 jumps happened within a 4-second window. 4 seconds separating the first set of coordinates from the last 41 ships appearing simultaneously across 7 Vreth staging systems that had spent the last 6 weeks building themselves into the backbone of the entire advance. The timing was the work of 3 months of coordination between navigators, engineers, and computer systems that had run the calculations so many times they could have done it in their sleep. I will tell you what I saw from the Callaway's position, because that is the honest limit of what I can tell you. I cannot describe all 7 engagements simultaneously, and I would not try to, because doing so would rob each of them of the reality they deserved. Real things happen in single places to real people, and the only honest way to talk about war is one experience at a time. We came out of the jump into Vreth staging point Cheel 7 at a 6-0 fleet time, and the first thing I saw was a Vreth logistics carrier so large that for a fraction of a second my brain categorized it as a small moon. It was 2 kilometers long, running with full lights, completely unprepared for what was about to happen to it. Our strike element went in first. 6 fast attack ships. The ones Captain Nina Ford had spent 3 months converting from standard patrol configuration into something closer to a precisely aimed impact. They hit the logistics carrier's propulsion and communication systems in the first pass, not to destroy the ship, but to immobilize it and silence it. Then the rest of us came through. What followed was 3 hours and 40 minutes of the kind of combat that does not look like combat in stories, because real combat is loud and confusing, and full of moments where you have to make a decision with incomplete information and trust that it is right. The Vreth garrison at Kale 7 was not small. They had 6 destroyers and 2 cruisers in permanent station defense, plus the crews of 11 supply and logistics vessels. They fought back hard and they fought back smart, and we lost 2 good ships in that engagement, the UDS Crew and the UDS Lambert. And the people on those ships deserve to be named, but their families have the right to know first, and this is not the place. What I can tell you is that by the end of those 3 hours and 40 minutes, Kale 7 was ours. The fuel reserves, the ammunition stores, the repair facilities, the communication arrays, all of it was either captured or permanently out of service. We received the status reports from the other 6 engagements over the next 6 hours. 5 were complete successes. 1, at staging point Vreth Nas, had been harder than expected because there had been a Dominion heavy cruiser in dock for repairs that our intelligence had not flagged, and it had fought through its damage and caused serious problems before Captain Ford's wing managed to neutralize it. The crew of that wing operated under conditions I would not wish on anyone, and they did it without flinching. Staging point Vrethnos was secured at 14:22 fleet time. All 7 staging systems were gone in one day. The effect on Grand Admiral Current's advance was not immediate, but it was devastating. Without supply lines, an advance force does not stay an advance force for long. Without fuel resupply, ships become very expensive stationary objects. Without communications back to Dominion space, a fleet admiral becomes a man shouting into empty air and receiving nothing back. Current's fleet did not collapse immediately. He was good at his job, and he had the resources to extend his position for a while, and he was not the kind of commander who stops thinking just because his situation has become difficult. He began pulling his advance elements back, consolidating, trying to create a defensible perimeter with what he had. We did not give him time to do it properly. The Anvil fleet jumped into his withdrawal path 3 days after the staging system strikes. while his ships were still in transit and not in formation. He had not expected a force of our size to appear there. He had been tracking our forward units, counting our numbers, building a picture of what he thought we had. He had not been counting correctly. The engagement lasted 11 hours. It was the largest single battle of the conflict. I will not detail every moment of it, but I will say that at no point during those 11 hours was the outcome certain, and at several points during those 11 hours it was very bad. And the people who made it through to the other side of it did so through skill and discipline and the kind of nerve that cannot be taught, only discovered. At hour 9, Current's main battle group attempted a concentrated push to break our line at its center. They nearly did it. The ships holding that center, 3 destroyers and a frigate under Commander Alan Briggs, absorbed fire that should have broken them and did not break. Briggs held his position with the quiet stubbornness of a man who has simply decided that a thing is going to happen, and there is nothing further to discuss. At hour 11, Current transmitted a withdrawal signal to his remaining ships. At hour 11 and 43 minutes, the Vreth advance, 241 ships that had arrived at the edge of our system with every intention of making a point, was over. We had not destroyed every ship. We had not needed to. What we had done was make the continuation of the campaign not worth the cost of continuing it, which is, if you think about it, the actual goal of any conflict. Not the destruction of the enemy. The creation of a situation in which the enemy has to honestly ask whether they can afford to go on. Current could not afford to go on. In the days that followed, the communications our intelligence teams were intercepting from Dominion space painted a picture that was both clarifying and, in a way I had not expected, a little sad. Not sad for the Dominion. Sad in the way that wasted things are always a little sad. The Dominion had built its empire on the certainty that it could not be seriously challenged. Every world it had ever absorbed, every civilization it had ever dismissed with a deadline and a threat, had either complied or been small enough that compliance was easy. The Vreth had not lost a significant military engagement in 200 years. They had no institutional memory of what it felt like. They were learning. We received a formal communication from Dominion High Command 7 days after the withdrawal. Not a surrender, not an apology, more of an inquiry. A carefully worded, diplomatic inquiry about the possibility of discussions. Speaker Marsh sent a reply. The reply said that humanity was open to discussions, that humanity expected those discussions to occur between equals, and that humanity's expansion policy was not a subject of negotiation. There was no reply for 11 days. I spent those 11 days in transit, reviewing repair status, checking crew rotation schedules, reading the engineering reports on our damaged ships. The Callaway needed 3 weeks in dock for her portside systems. The UDS Pharaoh, the ship that had taken an engine hit in the very first engagement, was being rebuilt from internal frames out, and her captain had quietly told me she expected to be operational in 6 weeks, and I believed her. On the 12th day, Petra brought me a new intercept. This one was different from the others. It was not from High Command. It was from a Dominion Military Council, a body apparently distinct from the political leadership, and it was discussing not the war, but the war's cost. Specifically, it was discussing the increasing reluctance of several member species within the Dominion sphere to continue contributing forces to a campaign that was not going as represented. The Vreth Dominion was not a single species empire. It was a collection of subject and allied species, some of whom had joined willingly and some of whom had not. For 200 years, the Dominion's invincibility had been part of what held those species in line. Remove the invincibility, and you remove the argument. I read the intercept twice. Then I sent it to Owen Greer with a note. The note said, "It is time to have a different kind of conversation." Owen replied within the hour. He had been thinking the same thing. We composed a message, not to the Dominion, to 3 specific civilizations within the Dominion sphere, species whose records showed a history of being absorbed rather than joining, who had been under Vreth authority for decades, and who, according to our intelligence assessments, were watching our conflict with very close attention. The message was simple. It said we knew who they were. It said we knew how they had come to be where they were. It said we were not the Dominion, and we were not building an empire, and we were interested in talking. The first reply came back in 40 hours, then the next one. By the time the third came in, Owen and I were sitting across from each other in the planning room, and he was doing the arithmetic in his head that he always did, and I was watching the stars through the window. "This changes the shape of the thing," he said. "Yes," I said. "Not just militarily." "No," I said. "Not just militarily." He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen and started writing. Below us, in the dark between the stars, the shape of something was changing. Not the war anymore. Something larger than the war. Something that would still be here, long after the last shot had been fired, and the last ship had come home. I thought about third voice in the assembly chamber. The dismissal in its posture. The absolute certainty that what it was looking at was small and manageable, and not worth real consideration. I thought about what was coming. Then I went back to work. The decision to move into Vreth core space was not made quickly, and it was not made easily. And I want you to understand that because what happened there carried weight, and weight deserves honest accounting. It took 3 weeks of debate in the inner council. Not public debate, not theatrical debate, but the kind that happens in small rooms between people who have to live with the results of their decisions. Speaker Marsh ran those meetings. She ran them the way she ran everything, with patience and precision, and a willingness to sit with discomfort rather than resolve it prematurely. I was present for all of them. I was not the most senior person in the room, but I was the person who had commanded the forward operations, which meant my perspective was one of the ones being weighed. There were 2 main positions. The first position was that we had already achieved the essential goal. The advance was broken. The Dominion had reached out through back channels about discussions. 3 subject species had made contact with us. From a strategic standpoint, we had won enough to negotiate a real peace. A peace of equals, and pressing further risk turning a victory into something uglier. The second position was that the Dominion had attacked a human settlement, had destroyed it without warning or mercy, and had killed 14,000 people who were given no opportunity to comply with any demand or remove themselves from harm. And that a civilization that has paid no real price for that action has, in a very practical sense, been taught that such actions are acceptable. Not morally, practically. The lesson of consequence had not been fully delivered. Both positions were held by serious, thoughtful people, and I respected both of them. I gave my own view when asked, plainly and without dramatics. I said that I was not interested in vengeance. I said that I had spent 19 years in service to humanity, and in that time I had never once seen vengeance produce anything worth having. I said the question was not what the Vreth deserved. The question was what the next civilization that looked at humanity and saw something it could threaten needed to understand. Then I said something I had been thinking about since the day third voice walked out of the assembly chamber. I said that the Dominion's military capacity was the instrument by which it maintained everything that was wrong about how it treated other civilizations. As long as that capacity was intact, the peace we negotiated would be a peace held hostage to it. Not because the Vreth were uniquely evil, because that is how power works. You do not negotiate away the thing that makes you powerful, unless you have to. We needed to create the have to. Marsh looked at me for a long time after I said that. Then she looked around the room. The vote was not unanimous, but it was clear. We would move into core space. We would strike the Dominion's military command world, Vrethkal Prime. We would not strike civilian infrastructure. We would not strike populated areas. The target was specific and the objective was specific. The complete removal of the Vreth Dominion's capacity to project military force. I want to be direct about this. This was a serious decision made by serious people, about a serious action with serious consequences, and it was made with full knowledge of what it meant. I am not going to tell you it was simple. I am going to tell you it was considered, that the people who made it thought hard about it, and that the alternative, leaving the instrument of 14,000 deaths, fully intact while we tried to negotiate around it, was not something we were willing to accept. The planning took 14 days. We had the coordinates of Vrethkal Prime from our intelligence assets, supplemented by information provided by one of the 3 civilizations that had contacted us, who knew the Dominion's home systems with a thoroughness that no outsider should ever have. I thought about what it must mean to carry that kind of detailed knowledge of the people who hold your world, to have learned it because you were required to serve them. And I was grateful for their trust, and very clear in my own mind about what we owed them in return. The force we assembled for the Vrethkal operation was the largest single human military formation ever put together. 107 ships, built and hidden over years, drawn from every reserve element and every forward position we had. I commanded the operation from the Callaway, which had come out of her repair dock in record time because her crew had not stopped working on her the entire time she was in dock. Petra ran tactical. Owen ran logistics from a command ship 3 positions behind mine. Nina Ford's strike wing led the advance element. We jumped on a Tuesday. What we found at Vrethkal Prime was not what I had expected, and I say this having done considerable mental preparation for what I thought I was going to find. I had expected a fortified system. I had expected heavy defenses, layers of it. The kind of installation that a civilization builds around the thing it considers most important. I had expected to fight for every kilometer. What I had not fully accounted for was what had happened to the Dominion's military capacity over the preceding months. We had, as it turned out, been more effective than our own conservative estimates had credited. The forces that should have been defending Vreth Cal Prime had been drawn forward into the advance we broke. The reserves had been sent after them. The units in dock for repair had been rushed out ahead of schedule and sent to reinforce Current's withdrawal. What remained at the core world was a defense force that was, by any objective standard, insufficient. Current had known this. He had argued against the advance, our intelligence told us later. He had told High Command that stripping the core defenses was a mistake. He had been overruled by commanders who could not conceive of a scenario in which the advance failed. The advance had failed. We came into the Vreth Cal system, and the defense force that rose to meet us was brave and it was outnumbered, and it knew both of those things, and it came at us anyway. I want that on the record. The ships that defended their home world knew the situation and chose to fight, and they deserved to be understood as what they were, which was people doing the thing they had decided to do with full awareness of the cost. The battle lasted 7 hours. At hour 6, a communication came through on the emergency channel, not from the defense force, not from the military, but from the Vreth High Matriarch herself, the political leader of the entire Dominion, a title held for life and guarded with every tradition the Vreth culture had built over centuries. The communication was a single question. What are you? I looked at Petra when it came through. She looked back at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then I reached for the transmission panel and opened the channel. We are the thing you decided was not worth warning, I said. We are the civilization you put a deadline on. We are the species you classified and dismissed and did not think about again. We are humanity, and we are here because 14,000 of us died before you knew our name. There was a long silence on the channel. Then the matriarch said quietly, "We did not expect this. No, you did not." Another silence. "What do you want?" she said. I looked through a viewport at Vreth Cal Prime, the great shipyards that occupied its orbital space. The military installations that had for 2 centuries been the engine of Dominion power. An end to this, I said, on terms that mean something. Terms that hold because they are built on reality and not on the assumption that you can threaten your way to compliance forever. Silence. Your military command installations will be removed, I said. Not your civilization. Not your people. Your capacity to do to someone else what you did to us. That is what ends today. The channel was quiet for a very long time. Then the matriarch said, "Continue your operation." At hour 7, the last defense station went dark. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be very clear about that. I felt something that is harder to name, a kind of completion, the way a wound feels when it has finally, after a long time, been properly cleaned and bandaged, and the worst is over, and now the slow work of healing can begin. Petra stood next to me at the viewport. She did not say anything. She had said most of the important things already, over the months at the right moments. And this was not a moment that needed more words. Outside, the orbital installations of Vreth Cal Prime were quiet, and somewhere below on the planet's surface, the Dominion was calculating what it had left and what it was going to do with it. We had taken the instrument of threat away. What they chose to build in its place was up to them. I sent a message to Owen Greer, one line, "Begin the diplomatic contact protocols." He replied, "Already started." I put the communication panel down and looked at the stars. Far away, past the Kepler belt, past the places the Dominion had told us we could not go, 3 million people were still living in their homes. They were still there. The armistice took 11 days to negotiate, and I was present for all of it, which was 11 days more time in diplomatic sessions than I had spent in the previous decade combined. Owen Greer did most of the technical work, supported by a team of people from the Assembly's Foreign Relations Division, and Speaker Marsh led the human side with the same unshakable steadiness she brought to everything. The Vreth side was led by the matriarch herself, not by a proxy. This was, our cultural advisors told us, unprecedented. The High Matriarch of the Dominion had not personally participated in an external negotiation in the organization's 200-year history. She had sent representatives, usually quite junior ones, because the act of direct negotiation implied an equality of standing that the Dominion had never been willing to grant another civilization. She was granting it now. Her name, translated, was something our linguistics team rendered as, "She who holds the deep current." And I thought about Grand Admiral Current and wondered if there was a connection in the naming tradition. I did not ask. There were things that were not my place to ask, at least not yet. The terms of the armistice were straightforward in principle, complex in execution. The Dominion would dismantle its military command structure and submit to a verification process. It would recognize the full sovereignty of humanity and all current human territories. It would enter a formal non-aggression framework with a council of the other allied civilizations involved in the conflict and its aftermath. In return, we would provide no support for any separatist movements within Dominion territory. We would return all Vreth prisoners of war, and we would make no claims on Dominion territory or resources. The matriarch signed the document on the 11th day. I watched her do it from across the table, this ancient and contained creature who had governed an empire and was now governing its transformation into something else, something smaller and less certain, and, potentially, more honest. Her hand was steady as she signed, her eyes did not change. Afterward, she looked across the table directly at me. I do not know why she looked at me specifically. Perhaps I was simply the most readable face in the room. "You set an end to this," she said. "On terms that hold." "Yes," I said. "Do you believe they will hold?" It was a genuine question, asked with a genuine openness that I found more surprising than anything else that had happened in 11 days of negotiations. She was not performing. She was asking. "They will hold if we build them on honesty," I said. "They will hold if neither side pretends the other is something it is not. We are not gentle. You are not finished. Those are both true things, and we can work with true things." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she inclined her head, slowly, in a gesture that our cultural advisors later told me was a Vreth expression of genuine acknowledgement. Not respect, exactly. Recognition, I nodded back. The armistice was done. In the weeks that followed, things moved with a speed that surprised even Owen Greer, who was professionally unsurprisable. The 12 civilizations that had been in contact with us during the final phase of the conflict requested formal affiliation with the Terran Accord, which was the name the Assembly had chosen for the framework that emerged from the conflict. The Solar Assembly became something it had never been, not a human government but a multi-species structure, with human leadership and shared governance, built on a foundation of the previous year's experience. I attended 2 of the inaugural sessions, and spent the rest of my time on return transit, depot inspections, and crew rotation reviews, which were considerably less historically significant, but considerably more directly useful to the people doing the actual work of keeping us functional. Petra was promoted to commander. She accepted the promotion with the same focused practicality with which she accepted everything. Owen Greer took a position in the new Accord's strategic advisory councils, which suited him perfectly, because what he had always actually wanted was to think about large problems from a comfortable chair. Captain Nina Ford received the Accord's highest military decoration in a ceremony I was glad to attend in person. She received it with the expression of someone who had already moved on to the next problem, and was attending the ceremony as a courtesy. I liked her enormously. I went home. Nora was waiting at the landing pad. She was 15 now, taller, more herself. She looked at me for a moment, and then she hugged me, and I held on to her for longer than I planned to. When I let go, she stepped back and looked at my face. "Is it done?" she said. "The fighting part is done," I said. "The other parts take longer." She nodded. "Mom always said the other parts are the real work." She was right, I said. We walked home. The city moved around us, ordinary and alive. People going about their days. Children running ahead of their parents. A woman reading on a bench in the afternoon sun. A man arguing cheerfully with a produce seller about something that clearly delighted both of them. The sounds of it, the weight of it, the specific texture of a world that was simply and stubbornly continuing to exist. I spent a week doing almost nothing. I slept. I walked to the memorial park and sat on a bench, and thought about the 11 names from the first engagement, and all the names that came after, and what they had contributed to the thing that now existed. I thought about Kepler Station, and the 14,000 and the 1,400 who had refused to leave. I thought about the young Vreth soldiers who had come out to defend their homeworld, knowing the odds and done it anyway. I thought about what humans were, honestly, without the filters of pride or fear. We were stubborn. We were adaptable. We remembered things we had been taught, and we passed them on, and we did not stop. We were capable of terrible things, and we were capable of extraordinary ones, and the difference between them was mostly the choices made by individual people in specific moments, which is, I suppose, true of every species that has ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. On the last day of that week, there was a ceremony at the Accord Assembly building, a formal marking of the armistice and the establishment of the new framework, with representatives from every member civilization present. I was not a principal at this ceremony. I was there as a witness, which is where I am most comfortable. Speaker Marsh spoke briefly and well, as she always did. Representatives from the affiliated civilizations spoke. A Vreth diplomat gave a short address that our translators rendered with care, and that was received with a silence that was not hostile and not warm but was honest, which was the appropriate response. Afterward, during the reception, a young Vreth diplomat approached me. She was, by Vreth standards, barely an adult, her scales still showing the slightly lighter coloring of youth, her movements uncertain in the way of someone who has been placed in an important situation and is trying to navigate it with more confidence than they feel. She stood in front of me for a moment and then she said, carefully in our language, "Will humans ever forgive us?" I looked at her for a long time. I thought about what forgiveness actually was. Not the word, not the performance of it, but the actual substance of it, what it required and what it did and why it mattered. We already have, I said. That is what makes us dangerous. We forgive and we remember both. She blinked. She was trying to work out what that meant. The forgiveness is real, I said, and the remembering is also real. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Understanding that is going to matter more to you than any treaty language. She nodded slowly. I could see her thinking about it. Good. She should think about it. It was worth thinking about. She said thank you and moved away. I stood there for a moment in the middle of the room, with the sound of the reception around me, multiple languages overlapping, the careful and slightly awkward social navigation of people from very different backgrounds, trying to occupy the same space and make it work. This was the harder work. Owen had been right about that from the beginning. The fighting was clean, in the terrible specific way that fighting is clean, direct and finite and measurable. This was the messy part, the long part, the part with no clear endpoints, no decisive moments, no dramatic final frames. This was the real part. I got a glass of water from one of the tables and went and stood near the window and watched the city outside. The same city where I had walked with the pedetry the evening at the assembly vote, when this had all been a knot in my stomach and a series of hard choices that had not yet been made. The same streets, the same towers catching the same late afternoon light. I thought about the morning I had sent the single-coded message from this city to the Defense Corps command channel and received a reply in 40 seconds confirming the fleet was ready. I thought about the moment the 42 ships had come out of the debris field. I thought about Briggs holding the center line for 2 hours under fire that should have broken him. I thought about the matriarch's voice on the emergency channel. What are you? We are the thing you decided was not worth warning. I looked out at the city and past it at the sky. And past the sky at everything beyond it, the vast unfinished dark full of civilizations and histories and possibilities we had not yet imagined. Then I turned back to the room. There was work to do. There was always work to do. I found Owen at the edge of the gathering, standing with 2 of the affiliated civilization representatives, already deep in a conversation that from the look of his expression, was the most intellectually satisfying one he had had in months. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod that meant he saw me and was fine and did not need extracting. I nodded back and moved through the room, checking in with people, listening more than talking, doing the small and necessary work of being present in a moment that was going to matter for a long time. Outside, a colony ship was rising from the port district, one of the new long-range vessels built in the last year. I could see the trail of its climb against the late sky, this small bright line going up and not stopping, heading out past everything that had ever been a boundary or a warning or a line someone else drew and told us we could not cross. Nobody was stopping it. Nobody was giving it a deadline. It climbed until the light of it was just a point among the first stars coming out, and then it was gone. I watched the empty place in the sky where it had been. Then I went back to work.